Welcome back to another episode of Worldie Unboxed. Today, Aaron and I will recap our recent Kickstarter soft launch and discuss expectations for the next phase of the business. As this is the beginning of a new chapter for Worldie as a business, we look forward to tweaking the podcast format. We still plan on including conversations with new and exciting guests, but we also want to focus on the next stage of this journey. So more to come on that. As always, follow us at worldiebrand.com. Also, check out our YouTube channel and Instagram page. All right, let's get to it.
Okay, so you want to start with just kind of like general reactions to the Kickstarter campaign and how we're feeling now that it's more or less closed. Does that make sense to start there?
Yeah, I think that makes sense. Then I'll twist around that question on you and ask you, now that we're on the other side of the Kickstarter, more or less, I know we're still doing a little bit of like late pledging, but we're at the point where we can look back at it and just do an assessment, especially based upon like our feelings going into the Kickstarter and maybe our expectations going into the Kickstarter, talking a little bit about that. And now that we're on this side of it, how have those feelings changed or not changed?
Yep. No, that makes sense and can definitely talk about that. So I think one of the major takeaways that I'm kind of having, there's a lot of takeaways, but one of the major takeaways that I have from this campaign is that, these things are hard. Starting a business is hard. These things take time. And we spent a lot of time, like we've been incorporated for over 2 years or over 3 years, I think at this point. And we've been on this journey for just about 4 years. And, because we had such a long business planning and product development phase, and we've done that publicly. So people have been, following our journey, and we have a lot of kind of, I guess, numbers to back up that a lot of people are following along with us. For me, I kind of thought spending so much time in that almost like pre-launch phase would make the launch phase super smooth. Everything would be not super easy, but easier, and that it would kind of condense that timeline. So I knew that starting a business it takes a long time, but I thought everything that we've done to date would just really compress that post-launch timeline, and that things would take off almost from day one. It's just a bit of a humbling experience that, look, there's a lot of hard work in front of us, and getting someone who has never heard about our brand or our product to buy it, it's a lot harder than getting a family member or a friend to do that. And I mean, that's obvious, but it's just, I think, a bit harder than we anticipated. And I know there's kind of a saying out there that you can create a company or a brand with 1,000 loyal fans. I think we both were kind of thinking, we can make a real step towards getting a 1,000 loyal fans through the Kickstarter campaign. On the higher end, we were thinking, maybe we can get like 500 customers. And on the lower end, I think we were thinking like somewhere around like 150 to 200. And where we landed was, a little bit lower than that, but I think it's still a good outcome. But, another one of the takeaways for me is just expectation setting. So you got to balance what you want to happen or what you hope happens, or you have confidence. You can have confidence that something's going to happen or that you'll hit certain metrics, but you need a plan in place if things don't quite go to plan. And I'm still trying to figure out, this is something that I'm still trying to learn, like how do you balance those two things? So maybe with your projections, it's almost like worst case scenario, or something that you think is the worst case scenario. You have to divide that by 2 or 3, and that's truly the worst case scenario. So yeah, I think just figuring that out, like balancing what we want to happen versus what's more realistic. I think that's just a journey that takes a little bit of time to lock that in. But I mean, overall, I think the campaign was a success. There's other takeaways. I won't drone on for too long, but I think overall it was a success. Not quite what I had, I guess, dreamed of. Definitely not what I dreamed of. And then in terms of what I thought was realistic, it's kind of on the lower end. But looking back at it and looking at other, comparable companies that have launched on Kickstarter, understanding that our product doesn't necessarily make the most sense for Kickstarter for a lot of potential customers, I think it is a success. I think we have a lot of really good learnings, and we'll be able to use that. And I think really in this next phase of the business, it won't be, like I was saying before, it's not going to be super easy, but we have a lot of data and information that we didn't have before that are going to help us make better decisions and kind of create a better strategy for the next, let's say, 6 to 12 months.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think a lot of the expectation setting or creating these benchmarks, we did in the abstract. We did look at other campaigns and we were able to kind of determine based upon their campaign and how that campaign went, where we should set expectations or set goals. Some of those campaigns were exact comparables, like they were kids' shoes, but most of those campaigns were just shoes, period, adult shoes. And so we potentially during the pre-run up maybe overestimated a little bit because we were comparing it mostly with shoes that were meant for adults, whereas this product is a bit different. And so I think the lesson learned is, as we create benchmarks or expectations in the abstract, we will have no idea where it's going to actually land. Now that we've actually done it, now we have a concrete like benchmark, like this is what's actually been done. And so our expectations can be more, aligned with what's been accomplished as opposed to, something that is relatively new, at least for us. So I think that is a big part of the equation. But overall, as I look at it from like a 30,000 foot vantage point, I think it was a very successful Kickstarter because it allowed us to learn a lot. And then it also got us a lot of exposure. We were able to experience some success when it comes to, the amount of backers, the amount of money that we're able to bring in, the exposure, fine tuning our messaging, understanding how people interact with the product, at least the advertisements towards, about the product. Like, I think all that is like helpful in gearing us up for the real contest, which is like the actual e-commerce setup, the real the wholesale setup. So I think all that is going to be beneficial in this next phase. And we had to kind of go into this and understand this in order for us to be good in this next phase. So I think all of this is just going to be, lessons in problem solving. And we're just getting, going to get better as we kind of go along, as we have more experience and things to kind of lean on. So yeah, we did spend a lot of time in the pre-launch world in terms of product development, like business planning, all this other stuff that I think is still going to be very helpful in this next phase. But also just the understanding that we've got to be extremely flexible. We've got to adapt. We got to, continue to be relentless. All these tenets that we've kind of leaned on, they're going to play a vital role in this next phase as well. So I'm happy with where we're at because I think it's a good launch pad for where we can be in this next phase. But yeah, I think coming out of it, still very bullish, still feel very confident. And, I think we're in a good spot.
Yeah, I feel the way that I feel about it is we're kind of like half a tick away from really exploding, where kind of like you were saying, we were on a ton of people's radars. A lot of people indicated interest, but there was just something about either Kickstarter or the offering that people were like, I was interested, but now that I see everything and I have all the information, I'm no longer interested. So I think that's a much better story versus like, it's just, we didn't get on many people's radars and the conversion was okay, but just the top of the funnel is not very big. I think we have a really good product. I think the concept, resonates with people. And I think that's more or less, borne out by the numbers. I think we had like around 4,000 people either check out our campaign or our website during the campaign. So to me, I think that's a really promising sign. We just have to figure out what it was about the offering that was kind of making people click away. So it could be that, Kickstarter just adds friction. People don't understand it, or they don't want to, buy something now that's going to show up 3 months from now. It could be that. It could be the price. It could be that it's kind of a brand new product and people aren't necessarily, maybe they're skeptical about a new product or they don't believe some of the claims that we're making. So I think a lot of that stuff, it's almost like a flywheel where as you get sales, as people say, hey, this is value for money, and they start recommending it to their friends and family. As kids are wearing it, people are seeing it around, they kind of become familiar with the brand. They know what the brand stands for. They see it out in the wild. Maybe at schools, kids are wearing it, and then other kids are asking their parents about it. So I think it's, you have to get that flywheel turning, and it starts out slow, but once it starts turning, it's much easier to kind of like keep that velocity going and then even increase the velocity. So I think we have a really strong foundation. There's just a few things that we have to kind of figure out and tweak. And I think once we do that conversion, I think the top of the funnel is fine. Then once we figure out how to convert more people, then I think the bottom of the funnel is going to start to look really strong too. And then that's when you really feel like you have product market fit.
Yeah, I think all that makes sense. And perhaps it's in order to kind of allow people in to what was going on, perhaps maybe revisiting like the early days. So for a Kickstarter campaign, day one, hour one, those are the maybe the biggest times in a campaign. That's where you're going to get that initial traction. That's where you're going to hopefully have that snowball effect, start creating FOMO. So perhaps maybe a little bit of like a window into our first few hours. How did that go?
Not great. We used a new feature that's on Kickstarter called secret reward tiers. And reward tiers are basically just a package that you're buying. And to date with Kickstarter, or until they release this new feature, all of those reward tiers were public, and you could see them even without a Kickstarter account. So you could, send a link to your campaign to someone. They would click on it. They'd be able to see everything. They'd be able to click on what they want. And then once they check out, you have to create an account, but they kind of would be able to see everything without the account. With secret rewards, the way that it works is you have to have an account in order to see the link. And the way that we did it, we had people who signed up for $1 ahead of time for special discounts and access to some other things that people were not going to have access to. The general public was not going to have access to. And kind of the way that we thought would be best to do that is with the secret rewards. But what we didn't realize was that you can't see the secret rewards unless you already have a Kickstarter account. And almost everyone who had signed up for that early access did not have a Kickstarter account. And also, I think the links were changing as we were kind of going into them and grabbing them to send to other people. So yeah, it was just like a whole fiasco for the first, 6 hours, where it was very hard to get people. We were trying and other people were trying to get in and see kind of these discounted packages, but we couldn't figure out how to do it in a way that was super easy for everyone involved. And then we ended up kind of just opening it up to the general public for a short period of time. So those discounted packages were available for I want to say 72 hours to the general public. And then that's the way that we got those early backers the opportunity to get those things. But just the way the Kickstarter algorithm works, you want to get as many people backing in the first hour really as possible. And we lost out on a decent amount of that backing, I think, because of the friction and confusion that was caused by using that new feature.
Yeah, it was a whole lot of learning at the very beginning. So I think it was once we launched, once Kickstarter went live, just as Aaron elaborated, just as you were able to kind of like talk about, there was a bunch of hurdles that just like appeared out of nowhere that we weren't anticipating, and so that was interesting. It became big to do because that time, and that's why I was trying to frame it, is so important, so vital to kind of really get the ball rolling, get the momentum going. Not that that's the end all be all. You can still have a very successful campaign outside of that time frame, but like that is a very it's a big aid in terms of getting to that level. So I think that's a really interesting learning point for us because right out the gate, we're met with, adversity, and we're met with something that has a huge impact. Not being able to kind of like send out links, not being able to sell the product, when you're trying to do so. And then, right after the launch happens. And so I think that was a huge obstacle at the onset. And so I like the way in which we were testing out so many different things. Like behind the scenes, we're going through creating new stuff, like new links, new email addresses, like all this kind of stuff. Like I have, I think like half a dozen new email addresses, and Aaron, Ryan, I think y'all have like at least 10 or 12 or something like that in terms of new email addresses, because we're having to try to test this stuff out and really like do it on the fly. And I think that's one of those unique characteristics of like a business, being able to kind of adapt and overcome in the middle of trying to reach, your target consumer, and all these things are happening. And it was just, it was a little bit of chaos at the beginning. And so I thought that was a really cool thing to have overcome. At the time, it sucked. Yeah, it wasn't cool to be in it. But looking back at it, I'm like, wow, that was beneficial, because that's going to be a memory. That's going to be something that's now kind of burned in our mind, that we get to look back at and say like, okay, that's something that we were able to overcome. That's something that we didn't stop. We didn't, let's get, cancel the campaign and figure things out. Now you keep going, you keep pushing, you keep pressing forward. And we still were able to meet our initial goal within a 2-3 hour windows. We were able to come back from that. So I think that was huge. And that's going to be huge going forward. So at the time, it sucked to kind of go through, but looking back at it now, some 30 days removed from it, and thinking about how we can use that in the future, I look back at it as like, okay, that was not a good experience at the time, but it's a good experience to have in our tool belt.
Yeah. And as you were talking, I was kind of thinking about how we've already kind of internalized that learning. So there's something that we're thinking about rolling out and having it be customer facing sometime in the next few weeks to few months. And there potentially are some hiccups with that thing, that feature. And now we're kind of like, okay, we need to test it ourselves and make sure that it works for ourselves, and then probably friends and family. And then, we just want to really pressure test that thing before we release it more broadly, because we don't want a similar process or similar kind of experience where, it works for us, but then these different people who have different, levels of comfort with technology or different programs or whatnot, where they're just kind of like, this is a very painful experience as a customer. And, customers, they remember that. And that first interaction is going to be super important. So I think we've already kind of learned our lesson. Like, hey, if we're rolling out something that's new, like cutting edge stuff seems super cool, but you need to make sure that it really works, and not just works for like 2, 3, or 5 people, but 25, 50 people. You probably want to be testing with a number closer to that versus like, hey, I tested it myself. Like I had some family test it out, and yeah, everyone says it's great. But you just need to make sure you're really pressure testing it, because certain things are always going to come up that you didn't anticipate. And the more data points you have to test, the more potential bugs or issues you can identify.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think we'll find that even beyond just the software aspect of it, like we'll probably be faced with that with the shoes. Like right now we've tested the shoe a lot. We've tested the shoe numerous times. There's still testing to be done, but I guarantee once we put it out there in the wild beyond like our controlled members, it's going to come back with some feedback that we weren't anticipating, or maybe that we weren't expecting. So I think all that is going to be beneficial for us in that stage too. Every single time we get, faced with like introducing a product or introducing a feature, there's going to be some sort of like nuance that we weren't anticipating. And so having the mindset of what's that going to be and how we're going, and, we already know in a way in which we're going to react. Like we don't know specifically what we're going to do because we don't know the specific problem, but we know like how we're going to approach it from a mindset. I think that's very beneficial because you already are in that headspace, and it might be something you weren't anticipating, quote unquote, but you certainly were expecting it. So you already had something built for it. So in the mindset built for it. So like, I think that's going to play a pivotal role throughout the life of this business, because it's going to always happen as we release new shoes, as we release like, new features, new like ways of doing things. There's going to be some sort of like feedback that is going to come when users use it in ways in which we didn't expect or anticipate, or things happen that we weren't necessarily planning for in the testing phase.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And then just something else as it relates to Kickstarter, I think, and this is probably mostly because of me, but I think we're kind of looking at other Kickstarter campaigns and saying, hey, we need all these ups and extras, or these add-ons that are Kickstarter specific, that feel like collectibles or kind of like unique items that are going to draw people in to buy the product. I think the thing that I realized is that the shoe has to be front and center. And I think we were always marketing the shoe first and foremost, but we thought that maybe some of these other things might get people interested. Maybe it's a way to kind of like upsell them a little bit, or people who had been following along with us, maybe they wanted some of these other items. But I think the thing that I realized is that a lot of people just don't care about this stuff. You kind of have to sell a product that people want to customers of that product. There are a ton of people who have been following along with our journey who say they want to support in any way. I'm not saying that financially, that financial support is the only way to support someone. But there were people in our network who said, as soon as the Kickstarter goes live, I'm putting down X amount of money. Just let me know, send me the link, and I'm putting down that amount of money. And then you do that, and then it's kind of crickets. So I think you have to give people an incentive to give you money. And I think, at least from my perspective, I was kind of taking people at face value and thinking that a lot more people would be interested in backing without necessarily being a customer of the product. But yeah, I think a lot of people don't. They're like, they look at the page and they say, I don't really want anything here. And Kickstarter, it's not really a donation platform. So I wish these guys success, but I'm not going to put my credit card down and, donate or buy anything from the campaign. And then you see other people come who are complete strangers, and they're super excited about a lot of this different stuff. And they're asking if you can create almost like custom packages for them, things like that. So I think just really focusing on customers, and this is not something that is necessarily going to be a consideration going forward, because going forward, we know that customers are really all we care about. If I could do the Kickstarter campaign over again, I would cut a lot of the extra things that we added and just focus almost solely on the shoe and the shoe only.
I think that's right. I think sometimes you get lost in the nature of Kickstarter, and you realize that a lot of the products that are offered on Kickstarter aren't necessarily direct comps to our product. And so the way in which they're able to run their campaign, it's not necessarily one size fits all. And so we took a lot of these strategies from very, very successful Kickstarter campaigns and just tried to implement them into ours. Like, we tried to integrate those ideas, those strategies into our campaign, which, in theory would seem like it should work. But again, we're bringing in like a base of backers that aren't necessarily familiar with Kickstarter, and maybe not familiar with the way like rewards or even like the process of fulfillment is set up. And so I think with all this extra noise that we created, we kind of drowned out what we were really trying to get people to focus on. And that was like the shoe, the concept of the shoe, the product that we really are, adamant was kind of getting lost in all the sauce. And so like, I think that was a good takeaway. I think, you said it was you. I think it was definitely all of us. Like, we were all, feature enamored. Like, and that happens in a lot of various industries. You get so fixated on all these bells and whistles, all these different features that you can add to the main product, the main course. And what it ultimately does is it drowns out the main course, as opposed to really complementing it in a way in which you hope that like people see and want. So I think that was spot on, because we all got fixated. I thought it was going to help the product a whole lot more than it did. But ultimately, when people are shopping for a kid's shoe, that's really what they kind of want. All the extra stuff is cool, and that helps to drive maybe maybe there's a little bit of people who get excited about certain elements that are offered in a reward tier. But ultimately, you have to kind of fulfill the process of bringing in a really good product, and the product that you're really marketing. And this is the product for us. This is what we're marketing. And I think we allowed a bit of noise to kind of drown it out a little bit. So I think that's right.
Yeah.
So staying with the campaign just a little bit, were there anything that was like surprising that kind of came up or that we weren't aware of? And even if it's like outreach or I don't know, any element of the campaign that you were like, wow, that's not something that I was like, anticipating, or that was not something that was expected.
This is something that I mean, it's logical,
Mm-hmm.
but it's not something that I necessarily realized, but it's kind of something that I'm taking away from the campaign, is that it makes a lot more sense to focus on, people who have already indicated interest and who have already backed. You're much more likely to upsell that person versus getting a random person, acquiring some random person, which, I mean, this is kind of general business principles. But that's something that I realized as people were kind of messaging me. They were like, hey, I bought one pair. I want to add this as well. And usually it was like, I want to buy a second pair for my second kid, or I want to have two pairs because my kid outgrows their shoes so quickly, and I want to kind of reserve this price for the second version of the shoe. So I think that's something that I really one of the main takeaways. It's like, and it kind of goes back to that 1,000 loyal fans point, but really doing everything you can to delight those customers, especially the ones who really believe in the idea, the concept, and the product, and figuring out a way to give them, continue to give them the product at kind of like a discounted price in a way that makes sense for both parties. Because then that encourages them to spend more with your brand, stay with your brand, be loyal. And it's just easier to continue to sell something to someone who's already familiar with the product versus trying to acquire a new customer where you might have to spend a lot in paid ads. They might be skeptical. They might even return the shoe because they don't like it or because of sizing issues, things like that. So that's something that I kind of realized, like, even it was almost like negotiations with some of these people because they were asking for things that weren't listed, and kind of figuring out, like, how do you give them what they want, like I said before, in a way that makes sense for both parties. So yeah, like kind of bundling and almost like a pseudo subscription that we've talked about. It just, the campaign kind of confirmed that bundles make sense, and figuring out a way to keep people coming back makes a lot of sense. And there's almost more value there versus going out and trying to just, I guess, find a bunch of new customers.
Yeah. No, I think lifetime value was definitely something that was highlighted in this campaign. Like, okay, if we can get consumers to kind of stick with us for a bit, I think there's a lot, because we realize how the difficulty of getting new customers. And so like, keeping the ones that you have is very important. Basic business principle, but this was a way to really emphasize that.
Yeah, and there's just kind of like putting a bow on the point. I was thinking about this the other day. There's a lot of conversation about share of wallet, and that's a a general business term where it's like, if I spend $100 on, I don't know, t-shirts, for example, and I spend $50 with t-shirt company A, then t-shirt company A has 50% share of wallet. And I was kind of thinking, for us, there's kind of like two versions of that metric, and maybe we'll have to workshop the name, but there's like share of shoe closet. So for one kid, how much of their shoe closet is worldie? What percent in terms of dollars? And then share of family. So what percent of the kids have at least one worldie shoe? And you can kind of expand in both ways, right? And then I guess that aggregates up to share of family or something like that. But that's another thing to think about. Like, for one kid, do we want to create different products or emphasize that it's one shoe for everything in order to basically outfit that kid with every shoe or just about every shoe that they need? And then how do we leverage, if there's one kid in the family that wears a worldie, how do we use that to convince either the younger sibling or older sibling to buy it as well?
Yeah, I think that's a good way of looking at it. And I think that really coincides with how we've been approaching it. So we've thought about kids at a certain stage and have really felt strongly with, about the idea that at this particular phase, when they're in that like sampling stage, it makes sense to outfit them with like a shoe that like can be used across all these different like sports and stuff. So like perhaps at that stage, that's the shoe. Whereas once you get a bit older, or once you have grown into a sport a bit more, then you start expanding the range so that it's more sport specific. So while there might be a concentration of sports into one shoe or one product at a certain age or age range, then it's still, you own a significant, or, quote unquote, own a significant percentage of that kid's closet, because perhaps they don't have as many shoes because they don't need all those different shoes. And then when you're talking about an older kid, or a kid who is, now in a more competitive time of their life, and they're actually playing sports at a level in which sport specific shoes make sense, then the way you can grow your percentage is by growing your offering. And so I think that is the way that we have been looking at it, but perhaps this is a better way of framing it and gives us a much clearer understanding as to like how we create a model that allows us to really take full advantage of that type of setup. So like, I think that's right on. And that's right on with our thinking when it comes to like development, and when it comes to making sure that we're doing a good job from like an environmental standpoint as well. So I agree with that notion and that setup. For me, kind of going back to the original question of what was a bit more surprising or something that I wasn't necessarily expecting, and it was perhaps more or less the medium and not the actual engagement, but there was an anticipation that we'd be interacting and corresponding a lot on the Kickstarter page with backers, which you did. I think you were doing a fair amount of that. But I was thinking it was going to be a high level there and like maybe not a whole lot elsewhere. What I found was almost immediately once we started doing ads, there was engagement. There was a lot of engagement, and I found new messages or new comments and wanting to make sure we're engaging and we're not just like silently dropping stuff and not responding. And so was able to communicate with a ton of parents, presumed parents, I guess, or people who were interested in the product to the point where they at least had some sort of comment. A lot of positive comments. A lot of that stuff, you're like, oh, that's good. But then the things that you really remember are the ones who try to challenge. Okay, there's a strong opinion in this particular niche. When it comes to kids' shoes, there's a lot of it makes sense because you're talking about the developmental stages of a human's life, and impacting those stages is something that like a lot of parents have strong opinions about what does and what doesn't. And so it can be a bit controversial. And so there were a lot of people who were on Team Zero Drop. There were a lot of people who needed the shoe to look a certain way in terms of shape of the foot. There was a lot of like toe box questions. And thankfully, we had spent the better part of 4 years focused on those type of challenges or features. And those are the things that we thought about incorporating in the shoe. There are so many different ideas with the shoe that we had based upon this type of information. And so now, being faced with it, that was it was very interesting to see that interaction. And I don't think it was the questions as much as the underlying passion that you could see or feel in some, these weren't like in person, we weren't talking, but like you can see it in the text, you can feel it in the text. There was a lot of like passion behind certain notions, certain ideas. And so being able to take that and really understand how do we need to message, like when we're talking about the shoe from a marketing perspective, like how do we need to set up the shoe? What can we anticipate based upon what we have seen from our target consumer? I thought that was extremely helpful. It even like helps and as I told a lot of people who interacted with us, that helps inform us in terms of like, these are maybe some things that we weren't necessarily thinking a whole lot about when it came to creating the product or putting it into our product, because we went through a bunch of testing and training and figured that this is the best way, or this is the way that we feel is best for most kids. And now thinking about perhaps there are different offerings that we can have, or, maybe we can have different types of shoes. And so I think that was very beneficial in terms of like expanding like what we think of when we think about creating a product. Maybe it's a line of products and not just a single product. I thought that was very interesting and also very helpful.
No, I kind of saw a lot of those comments too. And, as we just been networking with more and more founders, and I see these founders put themselves and their brands out there, there's just a lot of negative people. So I've almost lived vicariously through these other people over the last year or two. And sometimes I jump in and I defend them because I'm like, why is this person being negative for no reason? And they're kind of trashing this person they don't even know and saying things that are not true about this person. And a lot of times you kind of want to take the higher road if someone is saying that about you. So like at times I jump in and start arguing on people's behalves and stuff like that. But I was kind of, expecting that. And there were some like very negative comments. Like one guy said that our shoe is fugly rubbish. And I feel like at that point it says more about that guy. It's like, he looked like he was like in his 50s. And I was thinking this guy has nothing better to do than be on social media and just trash companies. That is almost to me more funny than it is something where it's keeping me up at night. The thing that actually is a bit more, I don't know if triggering is the right word, but a little bit more upsetting is it's when people come in and they express their opinion. I mean, if someone wants to express their opinion, to me, that's never an issue. It's when they kind of express the opinion and they're kind of like, well, I buy kids' shoes, so I know best. It's like, well, there's millions of people, tens of millions of people, maybe billions of people out there who buy or have bought kids' shoes, and you're one data point. And I get that you're very passionate about what you're saying, but we've gone through a very long process and we've tested this with a lot of different people, kids, parents, industry experts, designers. And it's a bit frustrating when someone comes in with an opinion and you're kind of like, yeah, I respect that opinion. And they're like, no, it's respecting it is not enough. You need to implement this because I buy kids' shoes and I know what I'm talking about. And then they almost kind of like downplay all the hard work that you've done, where one person was saying, you need to change the logo, you need to do this, you need to do that. Nike has the swoosh, blah, blah, blah. And then they were kind of like, I'm sure there's experts and professionals that you can work with that can help you with this stuff. And for me, it was just a bit upsetting because I'm like, I don't want to, come back and say to the person, like, we're not going to do that. We've gone down this path. We feel confident in it. And we've talked to a bunch of experts and professionals. And like I was saying, parents and kids, and they like it. So no, we're not going to go with your idea. So it's like having to be diplomatic when people are being almost unreasonable. That can be a little bit frustrating because for me, it almost makes me feel like that person is assuming that we haven't done the work when we've done a ton of work. And there's a ton of different perspectives that we've taken into consideration. And just because you have an opinion that differs from other opinions, it doesn't mean that your opinion matters more, that we should automatically go with your opinion, especially if you're not a customer. Like, why would we go with what you're saying? That's kind of my viewpoint.
Yeah. I mean, I try not to get I don't want to react to how they're saying anything because, a lot gets, I'll have a conversation with my wife and things can get misconstrued very easily. And so I think what I really want to focus on, and so there were some messages that were, they were worded in a way that, could rouse your emotions and get you upset. But then you have to kind of weed through that piece of it and really kind of focusing on the messaging, because even if it's just one single data point, it may end up becoming more than that if you can kind of see that happening over and over again. And so albeit we're looking at a very small, relatively small sample size. And so these are just these initial responses. These aren't even people who've worn the shoe, obviously, because we haven't delivered it yet, but they're just looking at it. And so they're providing some sort of insight as to what we're going to see on maybe a higher level when we are a bit more broadly, when we're advertising or we're marketing or we're, building more broadly. And so I want to always hear or listen to people and listen to what they're saying if there's something constructive in there. So if they're saying no, this is zero to so we'd hear a lot of the zero drop, we'd hear a lot of that, the foot shape one, and toe box. And so, we obviously built our toe box to be larger. So we wanted to make something that provided proper foot splay or room for proper toe splay. And so I think being able to look at these comments and really dissect anything that's of nutritional value out of it and take that as opposed to any other personal or anything that they might be just projecting because of who they are as an individual. I think being able to take the good things out of it, or the things that we could use for good out of it, is more important than muting them or keeping, or not listening to them because of the way in which they said it. So I really do value what, pushing up against what we're doing, because that's helpful. That helps us make a stronger, better product. And then for those who have, there's absolutely nothing in there, it's at that point, yeah, you don't have any, anything constructive, or there's nothing that I can use or we can use as a company to kind of build or create a better product or create a better process or create if there's nothing of nutritional value in there, then those are ones that you kind of just more or less ignore. But for the most part, even those who had negative and positive actually far outweigh the negative, but you almost kind of forget the positive and you just kind of focus on those negative comments. But I think that's actually helpful, because then you can start focusing on the constructive things that are potentially within those negative comments. So while we may not just react to one single data point, if we can use that to create, to create trend data, then perhaps that's something that is extremely useful going forward. So I welcome all people who want to offer feedback, especially at this stage when we're extremely extremely malleable and we can make changes, and it's not super expensive, and it's not something that will have some kind of detrimental impact on the company. I think hearing from people now is really, really helpful. It would be much better if they frame it in a maybe a nicer way, but like that is asking a lot for some. But I still, regardless of how you kind of frame it, I'm always open to feedback.
I mean, people are going to get feedback whether we ask for it or not. I think that's something that we've kind of seen for a while now. And for me, I think in my personal life and business, really in anything, I've always tried to focus on the message, not the delivery. But that doesn't mean that on a human level that the delivery is not going to make you upset. So it's kind of like, yeah, I treat all these people with respect and listen to what they're saying. But that doesn't mean that I'm not saying like this person is very annoying to deal with, but I'm going to just smile and interact with them as if they were very polite in the way that they kind of addressed me. So more or less agree with everything that you said.
Yeah. In services, I feel like we've dealt with that for a long period of time, having to weed through the messenger to get to the message. I think that's probably the way in which we're going to always have to do it. And many a time where I kind of had to step back from a message and not respond right away. Otherwise, you don't get the right tone. It becomes less professional. So always wanting to like, okay, let me take a moment, think about like what they're saying as opposed to how they said it or how they wrote it, and then figure out what are some takeaways there, and then also like what's the best way to respond to this. And so like I think sometimes being able to do that is difficult depending on like when it happens and to what like level of like almost disrespect they're operating at. But I think that's the biggest. So that's another takeaway as you're dealing with customer service, understanding that, hey, I can't just kind of go off. I have to lean through this message and figure out like what are the good takeaways, and then how can I respond in a way that deflects, that doesn't escalate the situation, but instead perhaps builds the foundation for that adamant person to be a loyal backer.
No, that makes sense. And it kind of reminds me of when we were starting out. I think you'll probably remember this story, but we were reaching out to try to find a designer, and I'd emailed this person at a university and saying like, hey, do you have anyone that you know who's been through your program who might be willing to design this product for us? And this person essentially said, I do know people who can do that, but I'm probably not going to make an intro because I don't think your product really needs to exist. Here's a list of all these different products that are already out there that I feel like your concept is not any different from. And, when you see something like that, you kind of want to, a part of you is almost like, thanks for getting back to me. I completely disagree with everything that you said. We're going to go off and prove you wrong. But yeah, best of luck with your future endeavors, that kind of thing. But obviously you can't do that. That'd be completely burning a bridge. So I think the way that I responded was more or less like, maybe I asked like, why do you think that or whatever? But like, yeah, we'll go back to the drawing board and compare against all these companies and try to figure out a way that we can differentiate. But we still are confident that our concept is differentiated. And, if you feel different in the future, or if you know anyone that seems like they might be a good fit and you want to make that introduction in the future, then we're open to it. But that's almost like the most fundamental disagreement. Someone saying, hey, your company shouldn't really even exist. And we're kind of like, we're willing to devote our lives to this thing. So I think we've had a lot of good practice with that at the very beginning, where there were a ton of people who were saying, hey, this isn't a good idea, or you're going to get crushed, or there's maybe something here with your dynamic, but the idea is not a good one. So figure out a different one. So I think we have a lot of practice with dealing with that kind of, I guess you could call it negativity, because we've been doing it for years.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, sometimes it's a bit disheartening or whatnot, but it's also part of the expectation. Part of the expectation. Anytime you do something in public, there's going to be public opinion, and then public opinion is not always going to be 100% in your favor. And so I think all that is par for the course of what we realized at the time. Perhaps when we were early on and we were getting hit with this stuff, it's a bit harder to overcome. And I can see why many a founder has stopped their venture very early on before it really even had a chance to grow and, adapt and evolve into something even beyond the expectations of the founder. So I think you have to be relentless with it. You just have to keep going through all of it. And yeah, your ideas are going to be pressure tested and potentially change or evolve. And there's a good amount of people who are going to be there as obstacles who don't really necessarily understand how ventures run, but they're actually doing a service in a way as a gatekeeper in the sense of like people who don't have that type of drive to keep going will be thwarted by these individuals who say they can't do it. But beyond those people there's people who've gone through that gauntlet and they've continued to carry on. They've continued to be relentless. They've continued to build companies that might start off as like a random bookstore on the internet. And now it does everything that you think, in terms of like delivering. And that's, Amazon or all these different companies start at some point, but they grow and they adapt and they evolve. And so as we listen to people, as we talk to people, I think part of the founder mentality is knowing that regardless of what this person says, good, bad, or indifferent, there's a belief that I will continue to keep pushing forward and continue to adapt. And so I think that's really just how we're developing as founders. And so I welcome those people now as much as I didn't welcome them earlier on. I think they're good because a lot of those people are really smart and they have a lot of, constructive like things that you can glean from their messaging, as long as you can take it along with the punches that they might be throwing too. Let's see. 3 takeaways that we can lean on as lessons learned going forward, things that will continue to be a part of the business for as long as Worldie's in existence.
I'm going to actually throw that back on you, or maybe we can kind of like ping pong back and forth because I need to think about it for a few seconds.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think one of the things that I will continue to carry on, and this is something that we've already mentioned, so it's not novel or new, is the ability to adapt to certain like things that just come out of nowhere that are the unexpected. I think it's one thing to say that, to have that in your head going into something like a Kickstarter, like, oh, I'm going to adapt to whatever comes up. I'm going to be able to be flexible, and then boom, you get hit. And all that kind of goes out the window. Having already gone into a fight, it's I'll equate it to this the way the military works. So like try to keep it to a quick story, and this will give you time to think of your stuff too. So I think it was post-Vietnam War. We were the Air Force was facing relatively high losses when it came to pilots. Like there was a lot of pilots, mostly fighter pilots, that were getting shot down, and there was we've got to figure out a way to fix that because they're going out there, they're going through their training, and then all of a sudden they get into the real fight, and we're losing too many pilots and too many aircraft. And so they came up with this fake war that's almost like a real engagement. They have this thing in Nevada, and so they have like a red flag. You're simulating war so that it's so close to it that when they get into it, there's a much higher chance, a higher probability of survival because they've already gone through a version of that before. And because they notice like that pilots who've had like several different like campaigns under their belt have a much higher probability of like, coming back and completing, surviving the mission. So they wanted to make sure that they can like have those combat settings in a much more controlled environment and get those pilots adjusted to combat much sooner and have a higher probability of those pilots coming back. I think for us, it's similar maybe to a lesser degree, but this was an opportunity in a more or less controlled setting because we're not talking our full-fledged e-commerce setup or a wholesale setup, so omni-channel approach yet, to have a controlled quote unquote fight and to be able to get, be tested with adversity, be tested with that first punch. And now we have that baseline knowledge. Now we have that understanding. And so the chances of survival are much greater now going into it. So I think my takeaway is that this controlled fight that we were in and being able to use it as a baseline going forward for the entire life of worldie.
Yeah. You want to ping pong back and forth, or you want to go through
And
all
so
of
that,
yours?
so you're not just hearing me just ramble.
Yeah, I think as you were talking, I was kind of thinking of that Mike Tyson quote, or I don't know if he actually said it or if it's just attributed to him, but essentially everyone has a plan until they get punched in the face.
Yeah.
And I definitely felt that. I think the biggest takeaway for me is just that I think parents are really price sensitive when it comes to kids' shoes, and potentially more price sensitive than we thought. And you kind of have to earn your right to charge a premium. So I'm not saying that we're not going to be a premium product, but if we do decide to continue to go down that route, it's probably going to be a little bit slower, just because it's that much harder to get people to try the product, and their expectations are that much higher when the product shows up. So I think building a brand based around premium products is likely just going to take a little bit longer, versus if it has a little bit more of a mass appeal. And again, it's, I think, one of the kind of themes of a lot of the things that I'm saying is that these are logical, right? Like, you should know these things in business, but it's very easy when you're planning things or talking about things before they actually happen to kind of wave off these things and say, we're different. But a lot of times you're not different than everyone else out there. There's a reason why certain things are truisms, or things that you hear a lot of people say, cliches. So that's just something that I think I realized, that for a premium product, like I said, you have to earn that premium. A lot of people are going to be skeptical. It just makes, you have to be outstanding in more ways, versus if you're creating a product that has more kind of like mass market appeal.
Yeah, I think that is right. I think the statement, in order to be, in order to charge a premium, you have to earn it. And I think that is something that we aspire to do beyond just being a commodity. We want to be something that is, equates to premium, both from the system that is designed around it to the actual product materials, all that. I think that's the level where we want to be at, not amongst the commodity type products, but in the category where we're offering something that we believe is of its highest value. So I think that's 100% correct. Also, my second one would be, and this is something that we definitely realized beforehand. We realized it earlier in the process, before we were even like a kid shoe company, and we were more or less ideating about adult soccer cleats. I think talking to customers is always going to be a critical component of the business. Engaging with them, listening to them, really trying to get as much information from them as possible with each and every single interaction is going to be pivotal, because that's going to be where we determine where to like get our lifeblood from. Like, I think that's like one of the major takeaways is like being able to talk to customers every single, like, I remember we would have these like customer discovery interviews, and every single time we would come out of those interviews, we'd like, wow, we learned so much. This is just another opportunity to reiterate this Kickstarter, and maybe at a much more mass level, less control, because we're talking anybody who was engaging with the ads, which is anybody, I guess globally, but mostly nationally. It really was a situation where you're engaging with customers and realizing that that's where we have to spend a great deal of time and focus, is engaging, talking to customers, listening to customers. And so I think that's one of the things that we will continue to carry on. That was a tenet of the business before this, but now it's been reiterated and emphasized. And so that's something that's got to keep carrying on.
Yeah, that's something that I think about a lot, especially because, kind of related to something we were touching on before, we have a lot of friends and family that are backing. And then we also have these people who are really buying into the mission because they're buying it on Kickstarter, which is, as we've mentioned before, there's a lot of friction in that process. So I think really leveraging these 75, 80 people, whatever the exact number is, and making them really feel like part of a brand, helping them shape the brand, and almost having them be part of our feedback and design team, right? So making it clear to them, like, this is the first version of the product. We think it's really good, but version 1 is never the final version of the product. If you're a successful company, there's always going to be iterations. There's always going to be improvements. And we kind of need feedback from where people who are wearing the shoe to actually understand what to improve. And I think when people know they're being listened to, when they know that they can shape the future of a shoe company, they're much more likely to, I think, be forgiving and also share some of that feedback more openly. And I think if we do that effectively, then not only does that help us create a better product, but it helps us create more loyal customers. And I think someone who's involved in that process is going to be a lot more likely to recommend the brand to other people. So yeah, I think leveraging these early customers is huge.
My last deal is more of a personal takeaway that I would continue to carry on, and it has to do with just the two kind of interactions that we have with the world. We either are consuming, so taking something away that someone else has either created or something else has either created, or we're adding to it, we're bringing something to it, creating something. And I think I spent a good amount of time consuming. A lot of people, I think in order to live, you've got to consume, but I spent, a lot of time consuming. And so being in this role, being able to create and add has, brought a lot of joy. So that's something where I could say I would want to spend my life work doing, is creating, building, adding something positive of value to the world, as opposed to just extracting that value from something like consuming. And so I thought about it like as I, went through the campaign, and as we're like creating, offering something that we've created and like wanting to add value to the world. And that's something that I'm like, oh, wow, that's really like what I enjoy doing. Like, this is what I want to do. Not to say that there's anything wrong with, being a consumer. And I will continue to also be a consumer as well. But I think this is an opportunity to do something different that perhaps a lot of people don't, have the chance to do, or maybe the desire to do. And it's something that I want to kind of always remember as a core driver to why I'm doing what I'm doing. Like, so when I'm asking myself in an internal, maybe it's a dialogue, talking to myself, why, asking why am I doing this, being able to reflect back and understand that this is an opportunity to give value, to give back, to be able to put something as opposed to take something from the world. So like, I think not to get too meta, not to get too, on a pedestal or something like that, but I think that's one of the things that I was able to really, again, just reiterate during this time.
Makes sense. I think for me, I technically gave 1 point because my second point, I was just kind of affirming what you've said,
You
but
got two in the chamber.
This can be my last one. I think just making it as easy as possible for people to buy your product. That's a major takeaway. Like we were saying before, we had some friction in the process, and even a very small amount of friction just based on the Amazon effect, really. I think people are so used to a very easy checkout process, and any kind of inconvenience or annoyance, you can lose that person. People are not really going to persevere to buy your product. They'll just go somewhere else and buy a product that they think is similar, that they can easily purchase. I think that's something that I'm thinking about a lot. Like, how do we just make it as easy as possible for people to try our product? Because we think once they try it, they'll like it. But yeah, just making it really, really simple and very easy, making that whole process very streamlined. I think that's a major takeaway as well.
Yeah, I think that's going to be huge for us, figuring that aspect out. Part of it, I think, is having some sort of omni-channel approach, meeting the customer where they're at, so they're not having to go, necessarily find you. You're able to kind of be there. Obviously, it's pretty expensive to do that. So you can only do that to a certain extent when you're really, a brand new company, unless you have a ton of financial backing. And I think also it's like having something to where it's, you mentioned like Amazon or something seamless, easy. And that's probably where we kind of were thinking about the pseudo or quasi subscription, like where we're able to provide almost a just-in-time product. But for first-time users, that's going to, you're still having to figure out ways in which you can get that first-time buyer, that first-time consumer, and figure out an easy way to do it. And I think having some sort of omni-channel approach is a good way to go about doing it. And then it's also kind of how you've set up like your e-commerce platform. Don't have a ton of control over that with, using a Shopify thing. So you're kind of like set up the way that they're set up. But like maybe being able to kind of think about that in the future. I know Amazon was able to do it. Like have the one-click checkout, Prime membership, things show up like within hours of you ordering it. I think being able to kind of think on that level, that's going to be very helpful going forward. So I think that's a huge thing that we need to continue to do, because that's going to be something that we want to continue to streamline as we continue this business. A lot of continues.
For sure. I agree with that.
Yeah, that's it in terms of, I mean, I have a bunch of other questions, but I think those are the main ones. Those are the ones, and we're already over an hour. So I think that was a good recap of the Kickstarter. A lot of stuff that we've learned coming out of that campaign, even as it's closing right now. A lot of things that we can use to jettison ourselves or jettison worldie into this next phase of the business. I'm really excited about that. But yeah, I don't know. Any parting shots, last words?
I think just, thank you to everyone who's helped us throughout this process. I mean, it's been a super long journey. There's a ton of people who have helped us along that journey. Obviously, as this is a Kickstarter kind of debrief, really appreciate everyone who backed the campaign. There are certain people that I had no idea were following along with our journey who kind of showed up in that backer report. And then also certain people that, were very generous with the amount of money that they put down. Definitely appreciate that. And then as we transition into this next phase, I know we have a ton of people in our network, and not everyone is going to be interested in maybe purchasing the product. So if there's any ways that you want to support or you think you might be able to provide value, like definitely reach out and let us know. And we always appreciate different perspectives or connections, or really any way that you think you might be able to kind of support our growth and our journey. Definitely would be open and appreciative of any other support.
I can only echo that and say thank you. Thank you for all the supporters, the backers, the people who've contributed, those who've contributed, even just comments and suggestions. I think all that stuff is welcomed, and look forward to this next step, this next journey, this next part of the business, and also our next episode. So till next time.